Good morning, everybody. Well, morning here in the UK, and I know that we have people tuning in from all over the world. So thank you very much for taking the time. My name is Ali Board, and this is Technique Tuesday, and I'm back after a short break over the summer where I had lots of teaching and summer schools and things. Thank you for being patient while I was away. And I'm back with a new look to everything, a new look to the website, a new look to Technique Tuesday, and I'm excited to share it with you all. Now, this is being broadcast live on YouTube so that I can see that there's lots of people already in the chat, lots of people talking to each other, which is what this is all about. This is all about us building this lovely, fantastic, inclusive, creative community where we can ask questions, answer them, help each other out, all of those sorts of things. So I can already see, I've said good morning to a few of you in the chat ahead of time, but I do just want to give some people a shout out. G'day, Julie. Julie, our lovely follower over there in Oz. It's great to have you back. And I can see that we've got members of the All Aboard artists, we've got all sorts of people, and people that I don't necessarily know yet either. So thank you very much for tuning in. Now, how is Technique Tuesday taking a new look? You can probably see we've got a slightly new scenery here in the studio. This delightful thing I will talk about in just a second. But the idea of Technique Tuesday now is that it's over to you. You ask the questions whilst we're live on YouTube or ahead of time if you want to kind of hit the next Technique Tuesday broadcast. And I will endeavour to answer them right here live for you. It's a slightly bonkers way of doing things, but it means that you can ask the questions and I will answer the things that are particularly bothering you in your artistic adventures at the moment. Lots of people tuning in and joining, lots of people saying found you. Fantastic. So get those questions into the chat. A few of you have emailed me ahead of time with some questions, and so I have those, and I have my little notebook right here ready to jot them down. If I don't get to answer them today, I will carry them over to the next broadcast, or we can have a chat on the blog and all of those kind of things. So before I get to that, I have got a little bit of housekeeping to do, if that's okay, because I'm excited to share with you the website. So let me just, I've moved everything since I was with you last. So don't forget, my website address is just down here, www.learningtopaint.co.uk, and the website has had a massive overhaul, so there might be things in a slightly different place to where you found them, but let's show you where to go and where you want to find broadcasts such as this. So like I said, the website has had a massive overhaul. It's got new colours, it's got new graphics, it's got all up-to-date artwork on it. And I didn't get a huge great team of people to do that for me. That is all my own work. So if something doesn't work, or you're thinking, oh, why isn't that on here anymore? Or do you know what would be really good, Ali? Would be if you could do this, then let me know. Let me know. There's no point me building a website without you having a part of creating it. Now, the thing that you're probably looking for are the things like the blogs. So you can see up there in the menu, your menu might look a little bit different, but it says LTP channel, Learning to Paint channel. So you can click on that first page and the Technique Tuesday blog, and you can see this is where you would ordinarily find all that lovely Technique Tuesday content. So all the stuff is there from what we've done previously. There's hours and hours and hours of content on there, projects for you to follow along. And if you enjoy watching those broadcasts that I do on the third Tuesday of every month, which are the tips and tricks, then there's a blog specifically dedicated to those too. So recently I have done a little demonstration of a dandelion. There's, as you can see, look, lots of content. Those are without commentary, but they've got nice relaxing music. If you don't like the music, just turn the sound off and have your own music going on in the background. But there's lots of things on here for you to enjoy. The workshops that I do, all sorts of information, plus a few few extra things about how this website came about, the inspiration that I had for it. You can read all about those things on here. So make yourselves a cup of tea, pull up a chair and go through the website so that you know where everything is and you know where to find everything. Now let's just have a look. I've got a few more mornings to say good morning if you've just tuned in. Lovely to see you. Some new names popping up as well. Thank you very much for taking the time to tune in. So let's get to those questions, shall we? I wanted to change Technique Tuesday to be more of a question and answer session because it occurred to me that during our time together, I decide what projects we're doing. I decide how those are going to go down, but it doesn't always answer those burning questions that you might have. You might have got stuck on something, or you might have some materials that you think, hang on a minute, this isn't working in the way that I anticipated, or it isn't working in the way that maybe I have used it, or you've seen another artist demonstrate with it. And that's what Technique Tuesday is going to be about. Now, you can't see the floor in the studio, which is just as well because it's chaos down here. What you can see is my lovely tool chest that I use every single day, which is full of all sorts of goodies in here, so that if you ask me a question and I haven't quite prepared for it, I am just going to kind of turn around and make it manifest itself on the piece of paper. Now, this might sound like a bonkers way of doing things, but it's exciting for me. Hopefully it will answer your questions too. And if for some reason I've got to go and run across the studio and find something that I think is pertinent to what we're talking about, we might go just to a tiny little ad break, so it gives you a chance to put the kettle on as well. So shall we get started with the questions that I've already had come in? I had a couple a few days ago, and I had one in the middle of the night last night for somebody who obviously thought, hang on a minute, this is a question that I have for Ali. So like I said, I wrote them down in my notebook, and I'm going to get to those straight away. So shall we go to that overhead camera and we can get cracking? So here are the TT questions that I had the last few days, and this might give you an idea of the kind of thing that people are asking me about. So we had a question from lovely Eileen. Thank you very much for emailing me, Eileen. She was asking about colours for a bright summer evening sunset. And I thought that was a really interesting question. That's the one that I'm going to start with today, because I thought it would be a nice way to kind of break the ice. And then Sarah emailed me, and she said she's got all kind of bogged down with perspective and trying to understand it. And the specifics were that, because let's face it, I'm not going to spend the next 60 minutes talking about perspective, but she said that she gets this word bandied around all the time, eye line, to be careful of where the eye line is in perspective. So we'll see if we get time to talk about that. And Lynn emailed me as well, because she was watching one of my demonstrations back again, and she was saying, Ali, you talk about gouache all the time, but I don't really know what it is. I don't know whether it's something that I should invest in. And also her question was that she hears me talking about it being white all the time, but are there other colours? So those are the questions that I'm going to try to tackle today. So let's start with that sunset, the idea for sunset colours, shall we? So I had a look through my photographs, and this was one that I found kind of lurking in those photographs that I have files and files and files of on my computer. And I found, and I think this is probably what Eileen is asking about, how do you look at a photograph like this and kind of translate it into colours that are going to look clean, that are going to work together? And so I thought I would start to tackle that, and we'll see where we get to, shall we? So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find myself some watercolour paper. Now, watercolour paper, of course, is all relative. I realised the other day after writing about it for something that I don't just have the one watercolour paper. What I have are several watercolour papers dependent on what it is that I'm trying to tackle, what kind of effect I want, all of that kind of stuff. So my kind of default watercolour paper, there's two that I use as a default, is this one, Saunders Waterford, or Fabriano Artistico. Now I've actually run out of Fabriano Artistico at the moment, so Saunders Waterford it is. Why is that my default watercolour paper? It's my default watercolour paper because I'm pretty sure I know how it's going to react with everything that I do. It's not going to kind of throw up any anomalies. I know that the colour is going to go down on it. I know that I'm going to be able to get wet into wet and the vignettes and all of those kind of things. So it's like a little safety net, really. And I would encourage you to find your safety net watercolour paper, because then if you are literally investigating something new, or you're kind of disappearing down an Alice-shaped rabbit hole and you're thinking, wow, I don't know how this is going to react, so I'm going to use a paper that I can pretty much predict how it's going to be. So because Eileen has asked this question, I don't know what it is that I'm going to come up against when I create this little sunset, or we'll look at colours for a sunset. So we'll use the Saunders Waterford, and then hopefully I won't be too scared by it. Let's get some other bits of equipment in so that we know what it is that we're doing. Let's get my pot of water. Let's get a bit of good old kitchen roll, because that's another security blanket of mine. Let's choose some brushes. Now, if we are just going to be poking this around and doing a bit of investigating and a bit of experimenting, I'm going to need some brushes just to kind of see how that goes. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to, again, my default brush, which is my imitation squirrel mop quill. There's much discussion about, is this a mop brush or is this a quill brush? To be honest, it doesn't really matter what it's called. It does the job. What it does is hold a lot of water and a lot of colour for me. So I've got me quill brush, I've got my paper, I've got my kitchen roll. So without further ado, we need to look at colours, don't we? So I think for this, let's have another look at that photograph and let's see where we think colours are going to go. And by all means, if you are live in the chat, add your colour guesses for this photograph. So what colours would you use? Because the colours that I use aren't the definitive version of it by any stretch of the imagination. You might have your own favourite colour, so stick them in the live chat. And if you're watching this on catch up and you're watching it via the blog, then stick it into the blog comments, because it's always good to have alternatives to share the things that you think you are going to use. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to start off with thinking about that pink, because it's a very vivid bright pink, and that is a photograph just straight off my camera. And yes, already I can see that there's a couple of suggestions coming in. Ali is suggesting, another Ali, you wait for one, two come along at once, is suggesting Rose of Ultramarine, which is down here just at the bottom. And yes, that would be a good option. Joe is saying Opera Pink, which is here. You can see these colours are all in my palette already. Yes, Cobalt Violet, Simone, that's a really good suggestion, because you get variations in the Cobalt Violet, don't you? So that would be a good one to play with. Anne is saying, my guess for the colours are Ultramarine, Cadmium Red and Quin Gold. Again, really good suggestions. I'm going to, good morning, Maureen. Maureen is in Florida. We are international today, aren't we? Thank you very much for tuning in. I also know some of you are just down the road. That's a lot of, we should get a map one day, shouldn't we? And put pins in it for where everyone is watching from. Now I'm going to go for quinacridone magenta, which is Hillary's suggestion. Now, that doesn't mean that this is absolutely photo perfect for that pink that's in that one that we were just looking at. In fact, it's probably a little bit redder than that. Trudy is saying Rose Madder, cobalt blue, and she's got a question for me as well. Thank you very much, Trudy. I will try to get to that. If not at this broadcast, then a future one. Now, the reason that I'm going for quinacridone magenta, and at the risk of name dropping, this is my brand of quinacridone magenta. The reason I'm going for it is because Anne was saying that she might go for cadmium red. And you're absolutely right, the red in that photograph is much redder. Now, we can only have those conversations as artists, can't we? Is this red enough? All of that kind of stuff. But the reason that I'm going to go for quinacridone magenta, and let's just put a little bit of it down on the paper so that you can see. So if we put that colour down, is there's all sorts of reasons really why I might choose that colour. Let's have a look at that photograph again. So I grant you that when you look at that photograph, you might think, okay, well, I wouldn't necessarily want to go for a magenta because that looks redder to me. However, when you're choosing your colours, you do have to think about the consequences of other things that are going on. So firstly, I don't know if you've noticed, but this Saunders Waterford is not what's called an extra white. It's not a bright white paper. It's actually a traditional white paper. And so what that means is that it's got a slightly yellowy tinge to it. You can probably see it. If we look at the white of the kitchen roll by comparison, can you see it's got a slight antique-y look to it? Now that antique-y look is going to affect the colour that I lay down on it. Of course it's going to affect the colour. And so actually when I put quinacridone magenta down on this piece of paper, it doesn't look quite so bright as it might do if I was using an extra white paper. So when you are choosing your colours, be really mindful about the surface that you are putting it on. Now we've got some amazing comments coming in, and what have we got? Jan is saying, I think most of us get bogged down with what brushes, what paper, what paint, etc. Yes, Jan, and I can talk about that much more if you would like me to. If you've got something specific about that, or you want to tell me what combination of materials you use, I can give you some advice. And Lizzie is giving some incredible suggestions of colours. So Winsor & Newton's Dumont Blue, Smalt, lovely warm violet blue. Yes, that's a really unusual colour, Lizzie, but I like your suggestion. And Anne is making some comments, some very advanced comments about colour mixing, which we could get into in future, couldn't we? About how magenta and yellow equals red. But maybe we won't disappear down that rabbit hole today. But the other reason, not only just because of the colour of my paper affecting it, but also if I want to create a real atmospheric that I get violets out of, this is a red that has a violet bias. And by that, it means that when it mixes with blues that have a violet bias, we get those incredible violets coming through, don't we? And Julie is saying, would certain colours make better blends that don't end up being muddy? Yes, absolutely, Julie. And unfortunately, I'm going to play my experience card now, which is really frustrating. I feel like I should have a paddle, like in Strictly, where they hold it up and it's going to say experience on it. The colours that I use, I don't just use because I go, oh, I fancy using that today. It's because I know the properties of them, because I may know the pigment numbers or the base of them or how they were manufactured and all of those things. And so if they are a paint that hasn't got a whole myriad of pigments in its makeup, I can be fairly sure that it's not going to make a muddy colour. And all of these, this is what makes watercolour so supremely frustrating at times, doesn't it? But quinacridone magenta is one of my standards because I know it's going to behave itself. That's the thing. So I've chosen my Quin Magenta. Let's have a look at the blue. It's the yellow that's going to be tricky for me because I don't particularly paint in yellow. But let's go for the blue. Now we could go for an ultramarine. In fact, it's very like ultramarine. We could play the artistic license card, couldn't we? And we could go for something like a Prussian blue. In fact, let's do a little comparison of what might be the best blue to go for. So this is my Prussian blue, and this is my cobalt blue. And I think it's going to be just a personal choice after that. So let's lay down some Prussian and see how that goes. This is Daniel Smith's Prussian blue. Let's stick that down and we'll see how we go with that one. So that's pretty good. It's nice and rich and nice and deep. I'm certainly going to, it's got what's known as a good tonal value. So I can get darks out of it, I can get lights out of it. I know that when I mix Prussian blue and quinacridone magenta together, which I'm going to do on my brush as opposed to in a palette, I know that maybe with a bit more quinacridone magenta, I know that I'm going to get that fabulous violet out of it. So that's quite interesting. But I don't know that this is the blue that I necessarily want to go for. Look at that. Shoved my finger. Technique Tuesday's only been back 20 minutes and already I've stuck my finger in the paint. Let's have a look at the cobalt blue. This is my cobalt blue, which has a very high pigment ratio in it. So it's quite a strong colour. Now that, let's just paint over that little fingerprint, shall we? That is also a colour that granulates, so I'm going to get a nice texture out of it as well, which Prussian blue and quinacridone magenta don't do. So that's going to be interesting, isn't it? Do I want there to be a texture in the sky? I don't know. I'm not at that stage yet. And if I mix quinacridone magenta with my cobalt blue, I get an equally delicious violet. Let's put a bit more pink in it. I get an equally delicious violet, but now I've got a violet that granulates. So can you see that pattern that I've got from the paper? That is where the little pigment particles are separating and sitting in the troughs of my paper. So I might get my texture that way. And it's a little bit clearer, a little bit more see-through in its strongest form than the Prussian blue is. None of these things are wrong or right. They're just different ways of thinking about it. So I think I'm going to go for cobalt blue. I think that's the way I'm going to go today. And then we've got to think about this yellow, haven't we? Now, yellow for me is always a struggle. It's not my favourite colour in the world to paint with. And I have three yellows in my palette that I use on a regular basis. One that's, look at the state of this. I really should have tidied up before I went live, shouldn't I? The yellow that I use more than any other is this one, which is called Bees Gold. Bee as in Buzzy. Bees Gold. This is one of my colours, and I use it because for the majority I'm mixing landscape colours or animal colours. So it is kind of on the browner or the greener end of things, not necessarily on the orange end of things. So unfortunately, today I don't think I'm going to be using that one. So that leaves me with these other two in my palette. Obviously, as I'm sure you're aware, I have 100 different yellows in my main box of watercolours. This is just what I call my day-to-day palette. So I could go through all the yellows if I was so inclined, trying to find the one that I want, but I've got two here. I've got yellow ochre, which of all the sort of browny yellows, what I call the straw colours, that is my favourite. I'm not a big fan of raw sienna. I seem to prefer yellow ochre. I don't know why, just a preference thing. And then I've got this one, which is grubby and got dog hair in it, which is lemon yellow. Now this lemon yellow is always the yellow that I use when I'm teaching colour mixing, when I'm teaching colour theory, because it's very bright. Not all lemon yellows are the same, I will warn you now, because some lemon yellows are very opaque and very flat. But this is the De La Rowney lemon yellow, which is a colour that I particularly like. It's fresh, it's bright, it's a pigment called PY3, so it's got a bit of oomph to it as well. Now, why might I use lemon yellow? Lemon yellow actually has a green bias to it, so if I mixed it with the cobalt blue, then I would get a lovely green, but we don't necessarily want green in our skies. What we definitely want is an interesting array of oranges. As you can see there, it goes from that kind of very bright yellow through oranges and into the pinks. Now I can see why Anne might say a cadmium red as an example, because cadmium red has an orange bias, so it's going to do that really well. But what you've got here is a red that's got a violet bias, but that doesn't mean it won't make orange. That just means it's going to make a slightly, what we call an off mix, a slightly more interesting orange. So let's go with that quinacridone magenta. And what I get then is a slightly more dramatic, slightly more subdued orange. I've got a glow in the dark colour here. I've got a real kind of colour with pizzazz, and I've got a very naturalistic colour. So I'm going to use the lemon yellow for this kind of slightly duller, more atmospheric orange, as it makes a better transition into the pink, I think. And what we've ended up really is with three primary colours. So we've got a yellow, a blue and a red. So to summarise, we've got a yellow that's got a green bias but is very vivid. We've got a red which has a violet bias, so it's going to make pinks and violets really nicely. And cobalt blue is always an interesting one to talk about, isn't it? Because for me, cobalt blue sits sort of slightly in the middle. You can argue that it's got a green bias. You can also argue that it's got a violet bias, and that's why cobalt blue is my favourite blue in comparison to something like ultramarine. Now, I'm not necessarily going to paint the whole sky for you, because this was just a question about what colours do I choose. But what I will do is I'll throw some colour down on this piece of paper so that you can see what happens when they all blend together. I'm going to wet the paper first so that I get a nice kind of wet in to wet look. And this isn't going to be the greatest sky in the world. It's just going to be an illustration for what might happen when you mix these colours together, or allow them to mix on the paper. So if I take that amazing quinacridone magenta, and like I said, you could experiment with this far, far more. I'm going to use the quinacridone magenta as a bit of a barrier between the yellow and the blue as well, so that I don't necessarily get green going on. And then if I end up with that blue, let's make a really rich covering on my brush. I can dab some of that blue back in. It's going to mix with the quin magenta and make some nice violets. Let's try and pick up a bit more so I get an even richer colour. And there you've got that kind of nice vivid quality that Eileen was talking about. If I take a bit of kitchen roll to it and we make a linear shape with our kitchen roll, then I'm hoping if I very lightly do a bit of rag rolling, then I might pick up some of the colours and get a few kind of cloud shapes too. So like I said, that's not the best sky in the world, but hopefully it gives you some insight into how should I choose my colours, what process do I need to go through to pick those, and what are they going to look like when they're on the paper, bearing in mind how they mix together, the colour of your paper, the quality of all of those things. Now, before we move on from the skies, Jackie has just asked, is it better to start at the bottom and go up to the blue as you have done? Jackie, I could write a whole book on that subject about which way round you should do your sky, and whether you should do it in thin glazes or whether you should do it all in one hit. I don't think there's necessarily a right and a wrong way of doing it. I started with the yellow because I didn't want the blue necessarily running into it and making green. But again, you can experiment. So are you going to, in your sky, are you, let's just say that your horizon line is there for some reason, and we'll talk more about horizon lines in a minute. Am I going to start with my yellows down here and then build up to my blues? So you're kind of going that way, or am I going to start at the top and get those dark blues in and then sort of fade them out in through my oranges, yellows and all of those kind of things? There's not one wrong and right. They are both just ways of doing it, because the other argument is that you turn your paper by 90 degrees and actually you paint it this way so that you can get your colours on and get them running and doing things, and then right at the last minute you turn it round so that gravity starts pulling all the colour south. So again, there's not one way of doing this, there's multiple ways of doing it, and as dull as it might seem, you've just got to experiment with all of those things. So I hope that answers an awful lot of questions that you had, or certainly the next time you need to tackle a sunset and you're a bit confused about what colours you need to choose. Also, with a sheet like this, it's worth going through and labelling these things, because there's nothing more frustrating than you sort of sticking this in a folder and going, oh yeah, I remember now, I did this experiment, what colours did I use? Because it's not always obvious, is it? It's not always absolutely obvious of the colours that you've used. So annotate. I tell my students to do this all the time. Annotate. I'm going to write down here, oh, my pencil's about to break. Look at this, is how organised I am. Backup pencil. Which order to paint? Question mark. And then, so this was lemon yellow plus quinacridone magenta. This was cobalt blue plus quinacridone magenta. And this was Prussian blue plus quinacridone magenta. So you get an idea next time, and you're starting from a different place then, aren't you? Next time you go, oh yeah, I had to think about this sky. You can look at your notes, cover it in writing. Absolutely cover it in writing. Make those annotations so that they're useful to you. They don't have to make sense to anybody else whatsoever. They have only got to make sense to you. So I'm hoping that has answered some questions, certainly for you, Eileen. I'm hoping you're lurking in the room somewhere, and that has got to the bottom of those. Now, I'm going to, one of the things I am going to do, which is a daft thing to do while we're live on air, but I saw Trudy asked a question. When mounting watercolour paintings, would you usually use antique white or an ice white mount? How to choose the best how to choose the best mount for a painting, please. So I'm going to add that to the book of TT questions. Because I think in future that would make a really interesting set of conversations about it. So I'm going to put what colour mount question mark, and then probably not going to get to it today, but that could certainly be the first part of our TT in October, which incidentally is on the 1st of October next time. So Sarah asked a question. And the question Sarah asked was, when we talk about perspective, that word that nobody wants to talk about because it's one of those things that makes students run away screaming, what does it mean when we talk about our eyeline? So this is quite a tough one to answer live, simply because perspective is a massive subject. Now the good news is, there's sort of good news and bad news with perspective, isn't there? The good news is, if you always draw what you see, your perspective will be fine. The problem occurs when your eyes see the way that your buildings or whatever it is that you're drawing in perspective sits in relation to each other, and something gets lost between here as it travels down your arm and out the end of your pencil, your paintbrush or whatever, isn't it? It's a really odd phenomena. My suggestion, Sarah, is to always have a ruler with you, always have a little perspective grid or something so that you can see which lines are parallel and which lines tip up. Now I can help you with the question that you had about your eye line, and I can tell you the pitfalls that you might be encountering. So first things first, if you are painting live, and it's much easier to see your eye line when you have your subject in front of you than when you're trying to do something from a still, so a photograph or something similar, because you don't really know where the photographer was standing and where the camera was particularly pointing, and if they've got a particular lens in their camera, has it distorted the perspective, all of those kind of things. Now, the interesting thing about your eye line is that is the horizontal line. I'm reluctant to call it a horizon line because that is something different and has its own set of stuff to go with it. But your eye line is very useful because anything that falls on your eye line is usually a horizontal line. So let's take a hypothetical. Let's say you've got a building in front of you that's all brickwork, okay? And you can see the corner of that building. So maybe you've got the sort of the face of the building, and then you can see down a street and it's disappearing off into the distance. You know from how you're looking at it that some of the courses of bricks are going to run in a diagonal line one way, and some of the courses of bricks are going to run in a diagonal line the other way. And the difficult part is, which way are they? Where does it happen? All of that kind of stuff. And if you get it wrong, that you can see that straight away, can't you? You can look at your drawing and go, well, that doesn't look right, but how do I fix it? So the important line in that course of bricks is your eye line. And where is your eye line? It's always here. No matter where it is that you're looking at that building with that course of bricks, it is always here. And you can be standing on a cliff, not that you'd be standing on a cliff looking at buildings, but you know what I mean, or sitting down. As long as your head and your body are straight and level, this is where your eye line is. So that course of bricks that's in front of you is always going to be parallel. And then what happens is it depends on which side of the building the bricks occur. I can see there's lots of questions coming in. I will get to that in just a second, but let's go to the overhead camera and I'll do you a very quick sketch about your eye line. So I'm just going to reach for a sketchbook so that I can do you a quick little drawing in the back of it so that hopefully you can understand this a bit better. So we talked about that course of bricks, didn't we? That it was usually straight and level, and it's at your eye line. If you're looking at it in a photograph, you can get hold of a ruler or the side of your pencil, line it up with that course of bricks, and wherever that line becomes parallel, that's the eye line of the photographer, okay? But let's say you've got a building and you can see, oh, hello, Ali. You can see the face of it here. It's kind of flat on, but here's our street disappearing off into the distance. How do you know which way that course of bricks should run? So the first thing you need to do is find your eye line. So let's say it's a relatively tall building. We're doing this in kind of miniature. It's a relatively tall building. And when you offer up a ruler or a pencil or whatever it is, your eye line is about here. So it goes, so let's say that your eye line is about here. Now, the interesting part of this is what's called a vanishing point, and your vanishing points can be all over the place, but we're going to sort of deal with hypotheticals today. I know this is really complicated, and this is why people run away screaming from it. I get it. But let's give you a hypothetical. that all of the parts, so this street that you've got disappears to a point over here, okay? If I join up the bottom corner of this building to my vanishing point there, and if I join the top of my building down to my vanishing point here, now I have a building that disappears off into infinity. But I know through measuring all of this business and looking away that here is the back corner of my building, just here. So all of a sudden, I know how the roof slopes and how this disappears off down the street. So it means that if I know where my course of bricks are, so let's put them in, we'll make them all higgledy-piggledy. Say it's got that many courses of bricks, I can join this line up over here to my vanishing point, and I can make my way down this set of bricks to here, and this set of bricks over here, and there you have it. That's everything beautifully in perspective, all because I knew where my eye line was. Okay, and my eye line was wherever I was looking at it, and it was straight and level. Okay, this, just for those of you who are out there screaming at your computer screens going, yes, but Ali, you've got to think about this and got to think about that and got to think about the other. Yes, I completely understand that. I get that there's a million other things that you have to consider. But when these words are bandied around, like Sarah was saying, what is my eye line? Then you've got to kind of backstep, haven't you? You've got to go, right, well, let's just understand one principle first. Let's just understand about our eye line, and then we'll kind of log that information. Perspective, a bit like colour theory, is one of those parts of art that you backfill. You don't kind of set out going, right, well, before I paint, I'm going to learn all about perspective, because that's the dull way of learning. It's much better to go, right, well, I've done some buildings and they don't look quite right, and I keep reading about it, and someone says that I need to know where my eye line is, and all of those kind of things. So you just go back and fill in that part of the information. Then carry on your way again. Then something else will happen, and you'll research that, or you'll ask an artist or whatever it is, and then they'll say, oh, you need to know about 3-point perspectives. You go, oh, okay then. So you'll backfill your information in that way. Don't sit down, unless you're me, and read books upon books upon books about perspective. It will make your head hurt. It makes anybody's head hurt. I don't care who they are. Unless you're a surveyor or an architect or any of those kind of things, just try to take it one little piece at a time. In the same way that we've discussed sunsets this morning, and we've kind of gone, okay, what colours do I need to make this picture? What colours do I need to make a nice, bright, vivid, atmospheric landscape? All of that kind of stuff. Otherwise, you will send yourselves potty. So the last question that we're going to tackle today, and I'm just checking, yes, I think Maureen's probably gone by now, but she was asking about catch up. Yes, you can watch this back either on my YouTube channel, or you can watch it back on that Technique Tuesday blog. So if at some point in the future you're thinking, oh, I've got this building project and it's got a sunset in the background. Hang on a minute, Ali was talking about this at some point. Where was it? You can go back to the blog, go back to the YouTube channel, and you can catch up on this information. I can see that there are lots of questions coming in about framing. It looks like October's TT is all going to be about mounts, picture framing, and all the rest of it, which is good because that was one of my jobs in a previous life, was a picture framer. So Lynn was asking, I wonder if Lynn is in the room. If she's not, she's probably watching this on catch up, so good morning, Lynn. She was asking about gouache. And if you've ever watched any of my demonstrations before, then you will know that I am a big fan of gouache. Gouache is one of those products that feels like a bit of a bolt-on, feels like an add-on, but actually is a medium in its own right. And it's a really old medium as well. Maybe not in the form that you would go and buy it in a tube now, but it's certainly at least 16th century, 17th century. If you think about it logically, there was always a way of mixing a pigment with various other binders. So if you were an oil painter, you would mix your pigment with a linseed oil. In the 17th century, you wouldn't have mixed it with an acrylic binder, but if you were a watercolourist, you would have mixed it with gum arabic. And you may have played around with those consistencies to get a much thicker colour, or as the French would have called it, or as a direct translation, body colour. So gouache is fantastically, it's older than you think. And also, after gum arabic was used, particularly in the US, there was a much cheaper alternative to gum arabic, and I think it was called dextrin. You may have to Google that or search for that. But then it became a much more manufacturable thing. It was used by illustrators, all the kind of pop art style of things, people used it. But Turner used gouache. It was called body colour. You look at any of his past paintings, particularly where he was doing cloud studies on blue paper, he would use a white body colour. So if you ever see on those, the little plaques that you get on the wall where it says watercolour and body colour, that's gouache. That's gouache in a nutshell. So again, I'm just going to reach for a couple of things. Let's get, what did I do with there's my pad. Let's get my sunset pad back again. And what I've got to do is scan around and find my gouache. So let's go to that overhead camera and let's see, after having a rummage, here we go. See, I did tidy everything. If you follow me on social media, then you will have seen that I tidied everything up. So this is the bag of stuff that I have when I go kind of out and about doing my teaching. Let's get some tubes of gouache out so that you could see the kind of thing that I might use. What haven't we got? I'm trying to get as many different brands of things out as I can. I don't particularly have one favourite brand of gouache. I tend to go by the properties of it or the colour that it produces. So here we've got, let's just go through them all. Let's go for this one. So we have got Schminker. This actually I picked up in a shop in London because this gouache is designed for calligraphy, and I picked it up purely for sentimental reasons because when I started to teach myself to paint, I started out doing calligraphy and illustration, didn't do the kind of fine art route. And this gouache has been formulated specifically for calligraphy so that it covers really, really well. So that is one brand. We've got the De La Rowney one here. That's I was sentimental about this one as well because De La Rowney was the paint that I first owned. Then we've got Winsor & Newton's gouache. We've got Pebeo. Pebeo do several qualities of gouache. This is their one called T7, which is considered their extra fine. And we've got Jackman's gouache as well. Jackman's is a brand that I particularly enjoy. They all have their own properties, but the overriding property of all of them is that they are relatively opaque, that they have a coverage, okay? And so you will very, very often see watercolourists or mixed media painters particularly using a white. There's lots of whites out there. There's zinc white, there's permanent white, there's titanium white, there's super white, all sorts of things. Effectively, if you have, if you're able to, buy 2 or 3 different ones and just end up with probably the selection that I have. Because, for example, this colour here isn't particularly made in another brand, so that's why I like that one. This colour here, this Cobalt Turquoise Light, Winsor & Newton do a really good job of. Winsor & Newton also do a really good job of their zinc white, but Pebeo do a better version of the metallics, all of that kind of stuff. So let's just show you how you might consider using it as a highlight for something on a painting, and let's also show you why you might enjoy using it, particularly if you like what I call feature colours. something that can give a little pop of colour in terms of being added to a painting. So I'm going to find you in my little sketchbook a painting that I did recently when I had my, where is it? We went sketching on location for my summer school, and we went to Corfe Castle, which is a very well-known landmark near to me. And this was the little sketch that I did, and any of you who were there on the day will tell you that I got really bored of this sketch because it was very hot. It was about 1,000 degrees, I think, where we were sitting, and it was really noisy. There was lots of traffic around, all those kind of things. And this happens a lot with my sketches, is that I paint it, and I paint it all terribly traditionally and realistically, and then I go, oh, well, this is really dull and I'm not really feeling it. So I went back in with some lime green gouache, some opera pink gouache, and obviously some violet gouache, and I added little pops of colour. They weren't in the buildings ahead of me, of course they weren't. Corfe Castle isn't overrun by opera pink. But there was a terracotta colour to some of the tiles in this roof. And when I put the first kind of layers of terracotta down, it just looked really dull. And I thought, actually, I need something else to make me excited about this picture. So this is how I use gouache. I not only use it for doing some editing, but I also use it to inject little pops of slightly surreal colour, because then it makes me more excited about the subject, or I think, oh, do you know what, I fancy using some pink today. So that is how I might go about using it. So on here, I just need to change the brush that I use, because I don't need it to be a wet, sloppy consistency. What I actually want it to be is a kind of double cream, yogurty kind of consistency. So let's start with that white. I've got it here in a ceramic palette. There are various ways that I use this. I sometimes use it in a tinting saucer, which you may have seen me use in the past. I got given this for my birthday, so this is my favourite thing at the moment. And if you get it to the right consistency, and that seems to be the key with using gouache, in that if you make it too thin, if you're too mean with it, in fact, let's show you what happens. You have your watercolour head on, and you go, oh, I'll put a bit of that white over here, and I'll add lots of water to it, and then you stroke it on. Actually, because this gouache is so good, it's still covering. Let's thin it out even more. You stroke it on, and it's a bit disappointing in its coverage. So the secret is to making it a really good ratio of pigment to water, so that it's still movable, it's still manageable, but you've got a very high pigment content in there. And then when you go to stroke it back over the top, look how good it is. And this is sometimes the test of whether a white is any good or not. Put a really dark patch of colour down on your piece of paper, swipe your bit of gouache over the top, and see if it covers. As you can see, this one is super, super white. But these were all the same paint. I didn't change the paint at all. What I did was make it the correct consistency. Now, this is one of my favourite colours of gouache. This is that Cobalt Turquoise Light from Winsor & Newton, and I'm going to make it the right consistency. Let's really give that a mix up and coat. You'll see me roll my brush in it all the time, so that I coat all of the bristles of my brush. I'll come back to that thought in just a second. And when it goes down on the paper, look how delicious that is. Lovely, even, flat colour. And so again, I could go back over the top of this, and I could add a very different colour to it. Now, the other thing to bear in mind is that gouache dries very differently. It has quite a shift between what it looks like when it's wet and what it looks like when it's dry. And the general rule of thumb is that pale colours dry darker and dark colours dry paler. As long as you have that in the back of your head, then you should be okay. Now, to come back to what I was saying about coating the bristles of your brush, if you only go and just tickle the surface of your gouache, so you can see there on my brush just the few first millimetres of the bristles are coated in colour, you will find that you run out really quite quickly, and then it starts to go to that coverage where it's not going over the surface. So think of it more like a fountain pen. Coat the bristles of your brush so that you've got plenty to feed, so that you can do line over line over line over line, and your brush is feeding that colour all the time. Look at the difference between those two things. Didn't alter the brush, didn't alter the consistency, I just loaded the brush better. And so gouache then becomes a huge part of your mix, particularly if, like me, you're a mixed media painter and you want it for adding, or for, for editing, or like I showed you in my sketchbook, that little bit of pizzazz to a painting that you've kind of lost the way with, or you're getting bored with. Something that happens to me quite a lot, because I tend to lose heart with my pictures, and so I look around at it going, oh, if I added some pink, would I feel a lot better about this picture? And you don't always have to paint things naturalistically, okay? I'm giving you permission to do that. If you want to paint something very bright, paint it bright. If you're going, I'm in a cobalt violet kind of mood today, but I want to paint a cow, make your cow cobalt violet. It doesn't matter. What matters is your tonal values, and maybe that's a TT for the future. Now, I can see from the chat that you've all been helping each other out. I'm going to go back through that chat after the broadcast to make some notes ready for the next Technique Tuesday. And so just to remind you about where you go for those things, go back onto the website, find the LTP channel and the Technique Tuesday blog, and then you will see, there we go, Technique Tuesday, so you'll know the date. You can click on it, and there's a little bit of information from me, and I will add the video there. And you can see there at the bottom that you can add a comment. Don't ever be afraid to add a comment. Don't ever be afraid to write something on the YouTube channel. I know some of you, we converse all the time, don't we, via comments on YouTube or all the rest, because I love reading them. I try really hard to reply to everybody, or to at least write something so that you know that I have seen it. I've lost the card with my bit of information on. There it is, found it. So I hope that you have enjoyed this new style of Technique Tuesday, and I hope that this has answered some questions. Maybe you knew this stuff anyway, but there's nothing like going, oh, I knew this and she's saying it, and actually I already knew that, because that's quite encouraging, isn't it? That tells you that you've got so far down your painting adventures, and actually you're heading in the right direction. So we are back on the 1st of October at the new time of 10 a.m. UK time. Thank you for tuning in, because I know that some of you, particularly you, Julie, are on the other side of the planet, and it's not quite 10 a.m. where you are. So thank you for every single one of you that tunes in. Thank you very much for participating in the chat and for answering each other's questions. Like I said, I will go back through all those things and get your questions to me ahead of time. So if you've got extra questions about picture framing or mounting or any of that kind of stuff, because that looks how TT is going to go down in October, get those questions to me. Send me a little email. That's ali@learningtopaint.co.uk. And what I'm trying to do, and I can see that some of you are really enjoying this, is to give you ownership of these TTs, to answer the questions that you are struggling with, to go, oh, it can be really specific. It could be, Ali, I'm doing this dog, I've got to the end of it, but I'm scared to do the nose. Send me the photograph, email it to me, go, how am I supposed to do this? And I will try my very, very hardest to give you some handy hints. And the hive mind, everybody who is in the chat before and after the broadcast, will help you out too, because that's why we're here, isn't it? Is to pass on what we know and to get information from others. So Thank you for joining me. It's been great to be back at TT. New set, new design, and get to chat to you virtually too. So until I see you next, please, please, please take lots of care. I'm off on holiday just in case you see me disappear for a little while, but I will be back refreshed and revitalised on the 1st of October. So I will see you then. Take care.